Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay, so don't be bothered by the numbers of people. Numbers never don't really tell much. They don't give you the reality of it. So the topic that was given to me was how Islam honored women. And we are definitely moving in a different direction in terms of our environment here in America as well as around the world. So I want you guys to kind of pay attention just a little bit to how this conversation unfolds. And then I'll leave some time afterwards for questions, answers, and any other suggestions or comments. But feel free to engage. All right. If I say something that you don't understand, this is not a didactic lecture, so I'm not going to talk for 45 minutes all the way through. If I say something that you either don't agree with or you have a different perspective, feel free to share that. All right. So I'll begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he deserves to be praised, and sending peace and blessings upon his prophet and messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And just to start by saying that in order for us to understand where we are now, we have to kind of go backwards a little bit, right? I've said before that life is paradoxical in that you can only live it going forward, but you can only understand it going backwards. All right. Pre-Islamic Arabia, much like other parts of the old world during that time, was predicated on a predominantly patriarchal system. You guys follow me? Where it was more like male dominated, right? That was pretty much most of the world during that time. That saw women as nothing more than, a social amenity, having children, keeping the lineage going, attending to the wounded, raising children. That was pretty much what they were regulated to. And the religion of Islam was seen as a threat at the beginning stages because it began to, challenge and threaten the socioeconomic infrastructure of Arabia during that time, which was, Islam was based upon justice and equality. All right, and you're going into and it's emerging in, in an environment that is filled with injustice on many levels. So it wasn't just about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, warning against their idols, and it was deeper than that. A lot of times when we read the story about Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, and how Islam emerged and how it gained momentum, a lot of times the narration that we're fed is this pretty, one line that, he was warning against, their idols and things like that. But we don't really look at how Islam as a system begin to, disrupt the socioeconomic infrastructure. We're talking about people that were worshiping idols, worshiping, false gods, and we're paying money for it. It was big business. It was big money involved in idol worship. Right? People had to go to the marketplace, buy idols, and pay a lot of money for it, right? So Islam comes and says, no, do away with worshiping idols, just worship one God. Now you're beginning to disrupt the socioeconomic infrastructure. And this is one of the issues that they had with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the great issues. However, another issue was that the injustices that was going on in Mecca during that time was injustices against women, all right, believe it or not. And this was something that this whole idea of equality and justice for everyone was something that the elites of Mecca could not handle that, and they weren't going to accept that. All right, just to give you an idea of the gender disparities that are outlined in the Qur'an. If you read the Qur'an, you will find many of these, gender disparities, outlined in the Qur'an very clearly, all of which the legislation of Islam came to reverse this system of misogyny, this system of patriarchal dominance, right? Islam came to reverse that system. And non-Muslim women, to such a degree that non-Muslim women saw converting to Islam as a means of escape of this system. They didn't want to necessarily become Muslim, but they also wanted to be, absolved and alleviated from this particular system. As a matter of fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed an entire surah in the Qur'an about this particular dynamic. It's called Surah Mumtahina, surah number 60 in the Qur'an. And the Mumtahina means to test them or to examine them, examine their faith, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in surah number 60, ayat 10, Allah says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, إذا جاءكم المؤمنات المهاجرات فامتحنوهن الله أعلم بإيمانهن فإن علمتموهن مؤمنات فلا ترجعوهن إلى الكفار لا هن حل لهم ولا هم يحلون لهن. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and this is why it's so important for us to be able to attach cultural context to verses in the Qur'an. When we just read them and we don't understand the cultural context, we don't understand how it relates to the environment that we're living in now. And the Qur'an is it is timeless. It will last up until Yawm al-Qiyamah. The verses are relevant to every time and every place. It's the problem of Muslims who just take the Qur'an and just read through it without understanding the context of it. But Allah says, O you who believe, when there comes to you believing women who profess to believe, muhajirat, those who migrated, left their homes, proclaiming that they believe, famtahinuhunna, test them, examine their faith to see whether they really believe or not. And then Allah says, Wallahu a'lamu bi imanihinna, and Allah knows best whether or not they really believe. And the reason why the Prophet was, commanded to test them, to examine them, was because many non-Muslim women, when they found out that a Muslim woman it wasn't permissible for a Muslim woman to be married to a non-Muslim man, and that Islam totally absolved the marriage contract once a woman converted to Islam, many non-Muslim women wanted to get out of and escape their relationships. So they would come proclaiming and professing to be Muslim, not really believing in Islam, but wanting Islam to alleviate them of the burden of the oppressive relationships that they were in. You follow me? So they saw converting to Islam as their way out. And this was something, something that was given to Muslim women by default of their conversion to Islam. And they knew that. And so Prophet Muhammad was commanded to test them, to examine them, to see whether or not they really believed. And how would he examine them? He would make them take what is called an oath, a bay'ah, a pledge of allegiance. And that was that they were converting to Islam not to leave their previous husbands, but because they actually really believed. So he would basically ask them, are you converting to Islam because you're trying to leave your husband, leave your previous marriage, or are you converting to Islam because you really believe? All right, he was commanded to test them. So there was no way for a woman to get out of, her marriage if it was oppressive or otherwise. So therefore, they figured they would confess or they would profess to be Muslim and then rely on the legislation of Islam to solidify their separation. Women or girls in the pre-Islamic era were seen as a sign of a badge of shame and dishonor on a family. All right. The Qur'an captures, the sentiment of many patriarchs in Mecca during that time, that when the news of a girl was brought to them, news of a baby girl was brought to them, the shame, the badge of shame and the dishonor that was felt as a result of a daughter being brought to them. Allah says in the Qur'an in Surah An-Nahl, ayat number 59, Allah says, وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالْأُنْثَى ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. That when one of them is given glad tidings of a daughter, his face would be blackened, with anger and upset. He would be upset and angry, at the news that was brought to him about the birth of a baby girl. This is the way that they viewed females in that society, right? In disdain. Right? It was a sign of shame for a man's wife to go into a room and to deliver a child and news to be brought to him that, hey, you had a daughter. And he walks away. Could you imagine? Like you walk away feeling ashamed that now you have a daughter. And then Allah continues in the ayah. He said, وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ يَتَوَارَى مِنَ الْقَوْمِ مِنْ سُوءٍ مَا بُشِّرَ بِهِ أَيُمْسِكُهُ عَلَى هَوْنٍ أَمْ يَدُسُّهُ فِي التُّرَابِ أَلَا سَاءَ مَا يَحْكُمُونَ. Allah says, and he's conflicted. He's conflicted whether or not he should keep this child in shame. And yumsikuhu ala hunin, should he keep this daughter in shame and, and deal with the shame, the public shame, the cultural shame that was attached to having a daughter, or bury her alive? Aw yadussuhu fit turab. Bury her alive. Ala sa'a ma yahkumun. How evil is it how they judge this matter? I mean, can you imagine a woman growing up, girls growing up in a society where this is how they are viewed? I mean, it does a lot to the psyche of women growing up in a society, in an environment where they are looked down upon, frowned upon, and that, a father would be conflicted whether or not he should bury his daughter alive or keep her in shame and embarrassment. But this was, a lot of people sit from a place of privilege and they judge the religion of Islam, including Muslims. And this is the ironic thing, is that someone who would say that they believe in Islam, they believe in the Qur'an, they believe in Prophet Muhammad and his, divine practices, and then turn around and find fault with, aspects of the religion out of pure ignorance, out of sheer ignorance, right? Because we fear what we don't understand, and we hate what we can't change. We fear what we don't understand. That's normal. Right? And female infanticide was very common in pre-Islamic Arabia in order to escape the shame that was associated with having a daughter. Female infanticide, you guys know what that is, right? Right? No, he said no. Can someone explain what that means? What does that mean? Female infanticide.
Basically, you're killing all female babies.
Basically, you're eliminating all female babies at birth, getting rid of them at birth, right? And we actually have a problem with that today. Not necessarily female infanticide, but just infanticide, period, where the whole argument now in Congress, the whole argument now is whether or not abortions, whether women should be allowed to abort or whether they should have to keep the child, all right? The same arguments are repeated over and over again. Nonetheless, so Islam attached virtue to caring for daughters, women, and made it spiritually meritorious. That not only is it virtuous, but in the sight of God, there's actually a reward for caring for daughters. All right? So when we look at the great scholar, he said to me one time, he said that when people look at Islam individually, right, pick apart the different aspects of the religion, they're not going to understand it. He used a metaphor like a car. He said if you took a car and you took the entire car apart and you looked at all the individual nuts and bolts and pieces, right, they wouldn't make sense to you. But when you see all of those pieces attached to the car, you see how relevant they are in the grand scheme of the car. Islam is the same exact way. When you look at this isolated thing, when you look at that isolated thing, these different aspects that many Muslims have problems with as it relates to Islam, whether it is marriage, plural marriage, a man being able to marry multiple women, right? You have so many Muslims that are up in arms about this. You have professed Muslim scholars who believe that this should be removed from the Qur'an. Right? Not understanding that when you look at that in an isolated situation, yes, it looks socially awkward. But when you look at it in the grand scheme of the system of life that Islam is offering the person who converts to it, you see that it's relevant, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. You don't have to agree with it. Because the whole of the religion, you're not going to understand all of it in totality. Right? There were many of the Prophet's companions, there were aspects of the religion that they would cry profusely because they didn't understand. Right? Many of aspects of our religion, the Prophet prophesies that there would come people that would be later, in the latter generations of Islam, that would have a better understanding of Islam as a system than his very own companions. Right? He said, رُبَّ حَامِلِ الْفِقْهِ إِلَى مَنْ هُوَ أَفْقَى مِنْهُ. Perhaps the person that is carrying the fiqh, the understanding of the religion, is carrying it to someone who understands it better than he does. Meaning the Sahaba who carried the knowledge of Islam from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, until we get to a point today where you have people who understand very clearly aspects of Islam that the Prophet ﷺ prophesied that many of the Sahaba couldn't even fathom. They couldn't even fathom. He would mention things that would happen in the future of his ummah that many of the Sahaba would question, like, is that really going to happen? And here we are today, living it. Right? An example, the Prophet prophesied that there would come a time where a Muslim would shed the blood of another Muslim. To the Sahaba, that was unheard of. Some of the Sahaba said to the Prophet ﷺ, Alana uquluna yawma idhin ya Rasulullah. What, people have their intellects on that day? They couldn't even fathom that a Muslim would spill the blood of another Muslim. And here we are today. Hadith wala haraj. Like, talk about it. Just situation after situation after situation. The blood of a Muslim is invaluable. There's no worth or value attached to it. Nonetheless, the Prophet ﷺ, he attached virtue to raising a daughter or caring for them and made it spiritually meritorious. He said things like, "Man wulidat lahu ibna, falam yu'iddaha, walam yahinha, walam yu'thir alayha waladuhu, adkhalahu Allahu al-Jannah." He said that whoever has a daughter, a daughter is born to them, and they do not bury her alive, they do not humiliate or shame her, right, for being a woman, and they do not give precedence to the boy over the girl, then Allah will allow him to enter into paradise. These narrations, like when we read them in an isolated fashion, they don't really make sense. But after I give you the backstory, after you understand the backstory of where he came from, right? The type of environment, the type of society that he was raising his own daughters in. If you notice that the Prophet ﷺ, he raised daughters. He had 2 sons. Both of them died in infancy. Neither of his sons made it to teenage or adolescence or young adults, right? He raised daughters in that same environment, right? So he attached virtue to raising daughters. He also said, "Man ala jariyataini hatta tablugha, jaa yawm al-qiyamah ana wa huwa kahatain." Wa ashara bi isba'ihi asabi'ihi al-wusta was-sababa. He said that whoever cares for jariyatain, whoever cares for two girls, and raises them until they reach the age of puberty, then he will come on the day of judgment, he and I, just like this, and he held up his 2 fingers to show the closeness. Why is he saying this? Why is he putting emphasis on raising 2 daughters? He didn't say anything about the boys, but he's emphasizing the daughters because of the environment that they live in. He's trying to change this mentality that women were somehow less than, right? The Prophet ﷺ, and another thing, the Qur'an identified or gave women their identity. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam, and then he created from Adam's rib his wife, right? So a woman was created from the man's rib. The woman wasn't created to live in the shadow of the man's rib, right? So Islam gave the Muslim woman her identity, right? As a woman, as independent of a man. So there's no need to compete with the male species in order to establish for yourself an identity. There's no need to compete, right? The Qur'an says, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرَ كَالْأُنْثَى, and the male is not like the female. And when we go after this whole idea, you have feminists, Islamic feminists, and others who go after this whole idea of gender equality. But gender equality on every level only dismisses the gender diversity. Right? When we seek to make male and female the same on every level, then you are totally dismissing the thing that actually makes us or gives us our identity, and that is that we're different. We're different. We're not the same. وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرَ كَالْأُنْثَى. So this ayat actually gave or confirmed for the Muslim woman her own identity. She doesn't need to compete with a man in order to, to be relevant, to be valid. She has her own lane, right? And the male has his own lane. But the Prophet ﷺ, in his attempt to cushion the blow that was being given towards the women in that society, he didn't deny that raising a woman was challenging, Raising a girl is challenging. Many of you are going to go on to have your own children, and you will figure that out on your own. Raising boys, very simple. They don't really require much. A little play, a little wrestling, a little this, a little that. Girls require something totally different. You will figure that out later. All right? The Qur'an confirmed this. The Prophet ﷺ, he didn't deny that caring for a female child was challenging. All right? So as to dismiss the cultural frustration that men had with raising girls. That, yeah, it is challenging. But there's merit to that. Right? Allah says in the Qur'an, أَوَمَن يُنَشَّأُ فِي الْحِلْيَةِ وَهُوَ فِي الْخِصَامِ غَيْرُ مُبِينٍ. That the Arabs, they used to say that the angels are the daughters of Allah. Right? And Allah says that, are you going to compare to God a creature that is raised in trinkets? يُنَشَّأُ فِي الْحِلْيَةِ. At what point do we get our daughter's ears pierced? I got my daughter's ears pierced. She had to be about 4 months. From the very beginning stages of her life, ears pierced, bracelets, earrings, she's raised in trinkets, right? This is a necessary component in raising girls, right? Boys don't require that, right? So this is a different type of creature. This is a different type of human being, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in another hadith, he said, مَنْ ابْتُلِيَ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْبَنَاتِ بِشَيْءٍ كُنَّ لَهُ سِتْرًا مِنَ النَّارِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. He said that whoever is tested with raising daughters, because it's challenging, right? It's especially when they reach teenage years and they begin to challenge your authority, and it's very difficult for you to look at your daughter and tell her no. Very difficult. That's one of the most difficult things as a father, to look at your daughter, your baby girl, and tell her no. Right? Very hard, right? As they have a saying that, she has you wrapped around your finger. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever is tested with raising daughters, مَنْ ابْتُلِيَ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْبَنَاتِ بِشَيْءٍ, whoever is tested with something of raising these daughters, then they will be a sitr for them from the hellfire. There will be a protection from them from the hellfire. That raising daughters, the difficulty that is in it or attached to it, will also serve as a protection from the hellfire. Right? In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ كَانَ لَهُ ثَلَاثُ بَنَاتٍ فَصَبْرَ عَلَيْهِنَّ وَأَطْعَمَهُنَّ وَسَقَاهُنَّ وَكَسَاهُنَّ مِنْ جِدَّتِهِ يَعْنِي مِنْ سَعَتِهِ كُنَّ لَهُ حِجَابًا مِنَ النَّارِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever has three daughters, and he is patient with them, meaning it's challenging. So he didn't want to take away from the men in that society the challenge that came along with raising daughters. He didn't want to dismiss that. All right? Someone asked, what building are we in? What building is this? Huh? The Student Center. We're in the Student Center. If you would like to come and join in the discussion. But the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever has three daughters and is patient with them, sabra alayhinna, patient with them, and he feeds them, clothes them, gives them drink, all from his wealth, right? Then they will serve as a hijab, as a protection from the hellfire on the Day of Judgment. There was a scholar in Medina who told us a story of a Saudi man, a real story, a guy who was a Saudi, and he had a wife, and he had a number of daughters, and he wanted a son really bad. And his wife was pregnant with his seventh child, right? The seventh child. He had 6 daughters up to that point, and he told his wife, if you give birth to another son, I'm going to divorce you. A daughter, excuse me. If she does not give birth to a son, if she gives birth to another daughter, he's going to divorce her. Well, this is not amazing to find men putting as if she has some type of control over, right, what child she's going to give birth to. But upset, frustrated with having 6 daughters, he tells his wife, if you give birth to another daughter, I'm going to divorce you. Meaning this child that you're carrying better be a son. So he goes to sleep and he has a dream. And he has a dream that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put him in the hellfire. It's a true story. That Allah put him in the hellfire, right? And how many gates of the hellfire are there? 7. لَهَا سَبْعَةُ أَبْوَابٍ. Allah says in the Qur'an that the hellfire has 7 gates. So every time he got to a gate from the gates of the hellfire, he opened it, it was one of his daughters standing there, protecting him. He got to the first door, he opened the door, it was his first daughter. He got to the second door, he opened the door, it was his second daughter. Third daughter, fourth daughter. He gets to the 7th gate. And he wakes up, scared, sweating. And he goes to his wife and says, I hope that you have another girl. I pray that you have another girl. Right? And finally, she gave birth to a boy. Got the boy that he wanted. No, I mean, you have to really think about that. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever raises 3 daughters and is patient with them, and feeds them and clothes them and raises them well, then they will be a hijab, a protection for him from the hellfire. So the Prophet ﷺ is attaching virtue to raising a daughter to change this mentality, change this stigma that having a daughter is somehow some type of shame or dishonor, right? So the Prophet ﷺ systematically reversed this thinking by instituting rules of engagement between men and women that obligates equality even in matters that may seem insignificant, like food and drink, right? When the Prophet ﷺ was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions another pre-Islamic Arab tradition, and that was that when a camel was pregnant with another camel is pregnant, if in fact that camel gave birth to the child, right, then the meat from that baby camel would only be for the men. But if the female camel gave birth to a she camel gave birth to a camel, and it came out and it was dead, then both the men and the women could eat from the food, right? So the men were given ta'am khas. They was given a specific type of food that women were not even allowed to eat from, right? Allah captures this in Surah Al-An'am. He said, وَقَالُوا مَا فِي بُطُونِ هَذِهِ الْأَنْعَامِ خَالِصَةٌ لِذُكُورِنَا وَمُحَرَّمٌ عَلَى أَزْوَاجِنَا وَإِن يَكُوا مَيْتَةً فَهُمْ فِيهِ شُرَكَاء. Subhanallah. Can you imagine a society where women can only eat from a certain type of food because they are not even privileged to eat from the food that men can eat from, right? And in American society, this was something that we practice as well. When mothers cooked, right, the husband got the big piece of whatever, whether it was steak, chicken, whatever it was, the man of the house got the biggest piece, right? It was pretty much the same, pretty much along the same lines. As if, she doesn't deserve the biggest piece. She slaved over the food, right? She cooked the food, right? She went to the grocery store and purchased the food, right? Many times it might have been from her own money. She bought the food, she went shopping and got the food, brought the food home, cooked the food, and then the husband gets the biggest piece, right? MashaAllah. So they say that what is in the stomachs of these cattle is specifically for the men. وَمُحَرَّمٌ عَلَى أَزْوَاجِنَا, and they are forbidden for the women. But if the cattle gives birth and it comes out dead, then both of them can eat from it. Some of the scholars say that it was the meat. Some of them say that it was the milk of the she-camel. That as long as what the she-camel was carrying was alive, then the milk from the she-camel was only for the men. And if in fact it came out dead, then the women would be able to drink from the milk. The Prophet ﷺ, he reversed this thinking systematically by instituting rules of engagement between men and women that obligates equality, even down to things that may seem insignificant, like food and drink and clothing. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, when he was asked about the rights of the wife over the husband. All right, if you notice the Sahaba, they never asked, what is my right over my wife? They would always ask, what is what is the right of my wife over us? Right? He was asked, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ma haqqu zawjati ahadina alayna. What is the right of one of our wives over us? And you would think that a man going to seek knowledge about marriage would be asking, what is my right over my wife? What does my wife have to give me? Their concern was, what is my wife's right over me? Why? Why are they concerned with the right of the wife over the husband? Accountability. They were afraid to go into marriage not knowing what their wives were responsible, they were responsible for giving their wives. And they wanted to make sure that they understood that clearly. While today, it's like, well, what's my right over my wife, right? That's the concern. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the right of the wife over you, and تُطْعِمُهَا إِذَا تَعَمْتَ وَتَكْسُوهَا إِذَا اكْتَسَيْتَ, that you feed her from where you feed yourself, and that you clothe her from where you clothe yourself. Equality. That if you eat from a particular restaurant, right, you don't tell your wife to eat leftovers while you're eating out, right? You buy yourself food out. You buy your wife from the same place where you bought from yourself. You don't go and buy Gucci or Louis, right? And then you buy your wife, pay less, right? No, it doesn't work like that, right? He said, تُطْعِمُهَا إِذَا تَعَمْتَ, that you feed her as you feed yourself. Equality. And you clothe her just as you clothe yourself. Right? So this makes her an equal partner in pretty much everything. So as you can see, Islam took the pre-Islamic patriarchal system and allowed men to keep their tradition of being the patriarch, of being the man, but being responsible for someone else. You see how that works? Islam didn't strip the man, which is what feminism does, right? This feminist movement, they want to strip men of their post, right? And replace it with one that is inferior. Islam didn't do that. Islam said, okay, you want to be a patriarch, you want to be the man, you can be the man, be the patriarch, but you're going to be responsible for someone else other than yourself. So Islam didn't strip men of that. All right, it just gave women an equal footing. Therefore, the responsibility of caring for her as an equal component of the familial and social structure of their society was less injurious. All right, it was not an injury to the man's ego, right? To strip him of that, to say, hey, you and women are equal. Right now, you guys are like this. Most of them would not have accepted that. Islam didn't do that. Islam said, you can stay here as the patriarch, but guess what? As a patriarch, you are now responsible for those underneath your care. You see, it's less injurious, right? And it honored women at the same time. Allah says in the Qur'an, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa," that men are the protectors and maintainers of women. So you get to keep your patriarchal status, but you're also responsible for somebody else. So if you want to be the patriarch, you want to be the man, right? But you are now also responsible in being the man. It's less injurious to his ego. As men, we don't want anybody to take that away from us. So what Islam did was give you the added responsibility that comes along with. So you don't get to be a patriarch without the added responsibility that comes along with it. You follow me? So this was opposite, the plight of, as I said, feminism, which seeks to replace women's previous status of inferiority with one of superiority, and vice versa for the men to take them from a superior place. You can't weaken, right? You can't weaken the strong by strengthening the weak. That's not, you're still going to end up with an unequal playing field. So what Islam did was not to make men weaker, but it gave women an equal status and made men, because of their superior status, you are now responsible. Right? You want to have this position of being the patriarch. That comes with an added responsibility. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allahumma uharriju haqqa da'ifain al-yatim wal-mar'a. He said, I swear by Allah, I swear to God, that I will go after and protect and defend the rights of the two weak people in my community. That is the orphan and the woman. You see what he did? He did not reduce the status of men in the society to one of inferiority. He placed responsibility on those who had that position of authority. And so as Muslim women in our day and time, it's not that you're fighting for women's rights, What we are fighting for is to get the Islamic organizations, masajid, people in positions of authority to acknowledge and to respect the rights that Islam have already given women. That is essentially what we're fighting. Both men and women, if Muslim women would understand that men are advocating for that as well. It pains me to receive a phone call, to receive an email from a Muslim woman who's being oppressed in her marriage and going back to her community and where she's from, and the imam is cool with the husband, so nothing really happens as a result of that. That's painful to watch that, man. No man is cool with that. So women, this whole feminist idea that all men, want to see women inferior, and that's not the case. We're all fighting that same fight to make the authority recognize the rights that Islam has already given the woman, the honor that Islam has given the woman. So we're pretty much along the same lines in that. And women were inherited in pre-Islamic Arabia, inherited against their will like property, passed along from man to man with no say in her own happiness. She was heteroautonomous and not autonomous to choose where she finds her happiness. Allah says in Surah An-Nisa, Surah number 4, ayat 19, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la yahillu lakum an tarithu nisa karaha. That, O you who believe, it is not permissible for you to inherit women against their own will. And what this meant was that if a man died, if a man was married to a woman and he died, this was pre-Islamic tradition. If a man died and he was married to a woman, his brother would automatically inherit his wife, like she was some property or something. She had no right to refuse. His family, if she died, his family automatically inherits his wife. If the brother decided, or the brother decided to marry her, he could. If he decided not to marry her and just hold her hostage in the home, then he would. All right? Had no autonomy to choose where she found her happiness. There were instances where women were married against their will, or with or without their consent. Married against their will or without their consent. And the Prophet ﷺ, he invalidated any marriage when it was brought to his attention that a man did this. He immediately rendered the marriage null and void, because a woman should have some say-so in where she finds her happiness. That is the autonomy that Islam gave to women. This is an honor. Whereas prior to Islam, a woman didn't have a right to choose who she wanted to marry. That choice was made for her. And unfortunately, that still goes on in some cultures today. That choice is made for you, meaning you don't have a right to choose where you find your happiness. I will choose what is best for you. This same system exists today. And unfortunately, some women, mothers, who it was done to them, turn around and do it to their daughters. How could you do that? You were forced to marry your cousin. You were forced to marry your, whatever, family member, tribal member, whatever. And then you turn around and do that same thing to your daughter. How? When do we break this cycle and give women the autonomy that Islam gave them? When do we stop this? Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, it was mentioned, collected in Sahih Muslim, the Sunnah of Abu Dawood, and that a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ. She said, Inna Abi zawwajni ibn akhi, that my father married me to his cousin. My father married me to his cousin. And the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet gave her an option to either choose to remain in that situation or to leave the situation. Your choice. The autonomy, the power that he gave her. You could either choose to stay in that situation, or you could refuse, and the marriage is null and void. Listen to what she said. She said to the Prophet in response, she said, "Qad ajaztu ma sana abi min az-zawaj." She said, "Walakin aradtu an ta'lam an-nisa anna laysa ila aba min al-amri shay." She said, I've, accepted what the decision that my father made for me, but I'm asking you because I want the rest of the women to know that their fathers do not have a right to force them to marry someone that they don't want to. I'm only asking you for the rest of the women. I'm cool. I'm good with the decision that my father made for me. Right? She said, "Qad ajastu ma sana'a abi." I've accepted what my father has done with me. But I asked you because I wanted the rest of the women to know that they actually have a choice. You understand? You actually have a choice. You can choose, your happiness. Islam has given you that. Right? As a matter of fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تنكح الأيم حتى تستأمر ولا تنكح البكر حتى تستأذن. He said that a matron, a woman who has been married before, should not be married by her father or any male guardian over her, should not be married except with her permission. She gives permission who she wants to marry. That a matron, a woman who has been married before, is not married except with her permission. And al-bikr, the virgin, is not married except when she gives her permission. When she is asked, does she want to marry? And the Prophet ﷺ was asked, well, usually in those situations, virgins don't know what to say. So how does a virgin give her consent? And the Prophet ﷺ said, what? Sukutuha. Her silence is her consent. Even a woman's not saying anything is her permission. You understand? Powerful. Even a woman not saying anything is her speaking. It's powerful. It's her permission. Because usually her silence would indicate that she's okay with it. Her silence is her consent. So even a woman not saying anything is powerful. That's how much autonomy that Islam has given a woman. When Umar radiallahu anhu, who was the Khalifa, he aligned himself with the legislative path of equality between men and women and gave women the autonomy to decide in the intricate matters of marriage that they once had absolutely no say-so in. There was a time when a woman was married, she was relocated to wherever the husband wanted to go. She was, told to have how many children she wanted to have. She was told to do this or to do that, and she had no say-so in the matter. However, that was changed. Islam changed that. When Umar became the Khalifa, a man came to Umar after marrying a woman and he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, قد تزوجت هذه وشرطت لها دارها وإني قد أجمع أمري أن أنتقل إلى أرض كذا وكذا. فقال عمر لها شرطها. A man came to Umar and he said, I married this woman, but she made it conditional that she gets to keep her home, that I do not move her out of her home. Right? He said, but I have made intentions to move here or to move here. And Umar said, Laha ma sharatat. For her is the condition that you married her on. Meaning, if she made it conditional that you do not remove her from her home, you cannot remove her from her home. So the man says to Umar, قد هلك الرجال يا أمير المؤمنين إذ لا تشاء المرأة أن تطلق زوجها إلا طلقت. He said, then the men, there's no more authority for men in this society if you are giving women this type of authority, this type of autonomy, that if a woman doesn't want to be married to her husband, then years from now it's going to come that the woman can get divorced from her husband. The Prophet Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, إِنَّ مَقَاطِعَ الْحُقُوقِ عِنْدَ الشُّرُوطِ. He said, all of the rights that you believe you have are gone when a woman stipulates in her marriage contract what she wants. And you agree to it, you don't have any more rights. You don't have any more rights. If a woman puts this in a marriage contract and you agree to it, you don't have any other right. You cannot take that away from her. Gave her autonomy to choose not to be relocated, not to be moved. And today you find that a man marries a woman, we're moving here, we're moving there, but I don't want to move. She has no say-so in the matter. And then unfortunately, this same man will go to the imam of his masjid who will co-sign, right? Yeah, well, you got to obey your husband. This whole idea of obey your husband, sister. Obedience is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obedience to the husband is conditional. We obey the husband, a woman obeys her husband, and what is in conformity with obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone can look back and say, well, it seems like you're advocating for the women. It seems like you're downplaying men or whatever the case may be. No, I'm just restoring to the Muslim women what Islam gave them. It's sad that it has come to this point in our ummah, especially here in America, where Muslim women have to create safe spaces. Muslims have to create spaces where they can have their spiritual and social needs met because we as men have failed them. We failed them. And that's sad Because all of this is documented. I haven't given you anything, yani min jaybi. I haven't given you anything from myself. Everything that I've given you is Qur'an and Sunnah. Allah said, His Messenger said, Allah said, His Messenger said. Everything that I've given you since I opened my mouth. And you're saying, well, where are the masajid? Where are the institutions that are ensuring that our women have what they need? We are only going to be as good as they are. And the fabric of our ummah is beginning to loosen and beginning to wear and tear because we are not doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us. And as a result of that, it's having a negative effect. So Islam didn't honor women by belittling men, but by giving women the autonomy to decide her path of happiness without the influence of a man. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-thayyibu ahaqqu bi nafsiha min waliha," that the woman who has been married before has more right to decide who she wants to marry than her own father. Autonomy. And here you have these overzealous fathers still making choices and decisions for their daughter. She comes home, especially as it relates to intercultural marriage. Now, this is another thing. You guys are going to school. You guys are noticing differences in different cultures. Yeah, I'm going to say it. It is what it is, man. It is what it is, right? African-American women are now looking at Paki and Arab men and saying, I wonder, right? Arab women and Indo-Pak women are looking at African-American men and saying, I wonder, right? It's happening. And we're bringing this home to our parents, and the parents are like, no, not going to happen. Not going to open my dead body, not going to happen, right? But eventually, that is ripping away at the fabric of our ummah because we are going against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated. And there can't possibly be much success. Allah has given us an entire system that works. We've seen it work. Right? We've seen the Prophet ﷺ marry women that were not from Quraysh. We've seen many men from Quraysh that marry women that were not Qurayshi. We've seen, the Ansar intermarry. We've seen that. And it works. And for some reason, we're still holding on to tradition, even though we are losing our religion in the process. And I mean, is it really worth it to hold on to these cultural traditions at the expense of losing Islam? So Islam didn't, honor women by belittling men, but by giving women the autonomy to decide her path of happiness without the influence of men. When Barira, and I'll end with this last example, when Barira, this woman who was a slave during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, her and Aisha they were very close. Barira, she was married to a man by the name of Mughith. Mughith was also a slave. They used to allow the slaves to marry. Right? And many of the great scholars of the Tabi'un and many generations that came after that we quote so frequently were actually sons and daughters of previous slaves. Absolutely. All right? When she finally secured her freedom, right? She asked Aisha one day to help her purchase her freedom. They had something what is called mukataba, where a slave would be given an opportunity to purchase their own freedom. They would go out, work jobs, borrow money, whatever, and pay their owner to free themselves. So Barira asked Aisha to help her free herself. She no longer wanted to be acknowledged or recognized as a slave. However, she was married to a man by the name of Mughith. After she secured her freedom, she told her husband Mughith, I don't want to be married to you anymore. And Mughith is chasing her down the street crying, right? Don't leave me. And the Prophet ﷺ, because he was just so merciful, he went to Barira and he said, this is, Abu Walidik. This is the father of your child. Halla turaji'ihi. Why don't you just go back to him? And she asked the Prophet ﷺ, she said, Atatmuruni? Are you commanding me to go back to him? The Prophet ﷺ said, La bala ana shafi'. No, I'm just trying to intercede for the poor man, miskeen. And she said, فَلَيْسَ لِي حَاجَ لَهُ. I don't have no desire for him. Autonomy. The Prophet didn't force the woman to go back. So today, like a woman, she doesn't want to be married to a man anymore. She's been oppressed for years, right? And then goes to the masjid and the imam says, just be patient, inshallah. Ispiri. Be patient, inshallah. What do you mean be patient? The guy is cracking me over side, up top my head, and punched me in my face so many times in front of my children, cursed me out, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and the only thing that you can offer as an imam is be patient. La wallahi. Barira went to the Prophet. She said, are you commanding me to go back to him, or do I have a choice? He said, no, I'm not commanding you. I'm just trying to intercede for the poor guy. She said, فَلَيْسَ لِي حَاجَ لَهُ. I have no desire to be with him. And the Prophet left it at that. That was autonomy for a person to decide, to choose where they find happiness. And we've taken that away. We've taken that away from people, and more importantly, the women in our community. So Islam gave the woman a voice. Even when she doesn't speak, she still has a voice. The virgin, she should not be married until she gives her consent. Her consent is her silence. So Islam gave the woman a voice. Islam gave the woman a choice. Islam gave the woman identity. And in the absence of all of this, right? In the absence of all, when we take all of this away, we eventually create an environment, create a situation that is going to be reactionary. So what we are seeing now of women taking off their hijab, women, this whole idea of this new age, 2018, hijabi-less woman who's just basically doing her, it's a reaction. It's a reaction to our failure. And the Prophet ﷺ prophesied that there would come a day where a woman would travel from Iraq all the way to the Kaaba, make tawaf around the Kaaba, and go home and not fear anyone except Allah. And this is the time that we're living in. This is the time we're living in right now. Where, because we have failed in providing them that comfort, providing them with that, we failed them in that. And, it's important for us to take a look at that. Because for every action, there is a reaction. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to one of his Sahaba, he said, فَإِنْ طَالَتْ بِكَ الْحَيَاةِ. He said, if you live long enough, لَتَرَيَنَّ الضَّعِينَ. You will see a woman, تَرْتَحِلْ مِنْ حِيرَ يعني من العراق حتى تطوف بالكعبة ولا تخاف أحد إلا الله. If you live long enough, you will see a time that will come where a woman will travel from Iraq all the way to Mecca, perform tawaf around the Kaaba, go home and not fear anyone except Allah. Women will be empowered. This is speaking about the emin, the safety and security of that particular time, but it also alludes to another point, and that is that women will have the autonomy that we refuse to give them. And they will take it by force. Anytime something is taken by force, there's always going to be, a ripple effect as a result of that. When you give something freely, then it happens naturally. And what we're seeing of women now becoming autonomous, they're taking it by force. And in taking it by force, there's a ripple effect that happens as a result of that. I don't know. Do you guys see that? Do you see that happening? You guys as women, do you guys see that happening? No? We have, women that are, in sports. We have women that are on the cover of, fashion magazines. We have Muslim. And what's happening is this society that we live in right now, America, is going to give you that. Because they want you out of your hijab anyway. You understand? They're going to give you that. They're placating your feelings of feeling like you're oppressed, feeling like you're suppressed, feeling like you're this. They're going to cater to that. Oh, Muslim men are not going to give you their... We'll give it to you. But behind all of that, the devil is in the details. You got to understand where that's leading us. Yes, absolutely. This society is going to give you everything that you feel that you don't have. This is exactly what Shaitan did to Adam. Adam thought that he could live in Jannah, and just because this one tree he couldn't eat from, he thought that was so important. So when Shaitan came to him, he said, "Hal adullaka ala shajaratil khuldi wal mulkin la yabla." Can I direct you to a tree that will give you everlasting life? Right? And Adam fell for that because Shaitan was making him an offer for something that he thought that he was missing out on. He played on that. And that's exactly what the devils in our society will do to you. And before you know it, you'll be completely out of your hijab. You'll be completely out of Islam. So you have many Muslim women who today don't wear hijab. They're not hijab. I'm not necessarily a hijabi. Well, you ought to be. Nonetheless, that you believe that doesn't make me any less of a Muslim. Well, in fact, it does to some degree. It does. Don't say that because I don't wear hijab that doesn't make me any less of a Muslim. It does. It does. A woman who chooses to cover herself despite everything that's going on around them. You think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward you like He is going to reward her? Absolutely not. Are we going to deal with those who chose to be disobedient versus those who chose to submit to the commandments of Allah? Are we going to deal with them the same? What's wrong with you and how you judge? You're not going to be dealt with the same. So this whole idea that I don't have to necessarily wear hijab in order to identify with Islam, eventually as you continue to not identify with the hijab, which is actually a staple in our religion, it's part of our deen. Don't erase that. Don't erase that. Don't look at the woman who wears niqab and say, well, that's a bit extreme. We should embrace that. Even non-Muslims, non-Muslim women, they respect the fact that you wear hijab. They respect the fact that you wear niqab. And here you have your Muslim sister looking at you like you're extreme. How? How did we get to that point? And, as we continue like this, eventually it begins to shave away, as the Prophet ﷺ used the metaphor of shaving away your religion. You begin to disassociate. This is what is happening. This process of disassociating yourself with anything that is reflective or symbolizes Islam. Anything that is reflective or symbolizes Islam, you completely disassociate yourself from it. Believing that by doing so, you're somehow achieving, this grand autonomy that America is offering, Be careful, man, and understand what is happening to our ummah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I don't know if you guys had any questions. Some of you guys kind of came in late. I don't know if you have any questions or comments about what was presented. You guys can ask your question. You don't have to write it on a paper. I'm not with this traditional Islamic stuff, man. You can ask your question. Not a problem. You ask your professor in class, right? I don't think that I would do more harm to you than your professor would. I pray. Allahumma. Allahumma. Because when you write it down on a piece of paper, sometimes the speaker, he gets the paper, right? He doesn't really understand it, and then he answers it based upon how he understood it. It's like sending a text message. The worst way to communicate. He said, thank you. Text message, especially for couples. There shouldn't be no couples in here. But anyway, for married couples, the absolute worst way to communicate is through text message. Horrible. I'm a marriage counselor. I can tell you, including my own marriage, that has taken so many blows because of communicating through text message. We are essentially trying to communicate an emotion through emoji. Through a few words that we're hoping the person understands our feelings. So when the person reads it and they, have the audacity to pick up the phone, right, as I do, I'm tired of the back and forth text message, so I pick up the phone and be like, why did you have to say, well, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, can't you see the exclamation? Can't you see this? It's like, I don't read text message. There's a message within the message, right? And Allah tells us in the Qur'an, وَكُلِّ عِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنزَغُ بَيْنَهُمْ. That say to my servants, they should only choose the best words to say to one another because shaitan sows discord between them. This is even when you're talking verbally. So how much more when you're using something as ambiguous as a text message? All right. So if I read the message and I answer it based upon my understanding and that's not what you meant, please correct me, inshallah. How can a woman get involved in a male-dominated masjid where the board is predominantly males? Good question. That's a lecture within itself. I think what is eventually going to happen, either the masajid are going to start realizing the shortcomings that they have in catering to the community and servicing the community, or the community is going to eventually have to learn how to work around them, which they are doing. What you guys are doing right now is working around the masjid. You didn't wait for a masjid to accommodate you. You did it right here on your campus. Eventually, we're going to have to, right now, we're organizing a one-day marriage retreat in Atlanta. And somebody said, well, what masjid is it? It's not, we just rented out a hall. We put some flyers out, some tickets out, and we're doing it without the help of the masjid. And that's eventually what's going to continue to happen until people realize we don't actually need the masjid to organize events and to get people involved. You don't. I'm saying to you as an imam of a masjid, you don't. And, unfortunately, this is, as I said before, when we don't conform to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, ordained or what Allah has instructed us, then that will be taken by force. And when it's taken by force, there's a ripple effect. All right. The masjids, unfortunately, today are, bureaucracies that are passed down from one family to another family or one group of people to another group of people without any concern for the social, spiritual needs of the community. It's sad. It's unfortunate, So I would say to that you don't necessarily need the masjid to get more involved. You can, make your pitch. You guys are graduated from universities. You're coming home with certain expertises in certain fields. And to offer that expertise to your masjid and to tell them, now we don't really need you. We're good. Shukran. Then you got to beat the pavement. And you got to go and start your own thing. You have many masajid who have, youth groups and youth organizations and things like that are organizing events. And, sometimes the masjid gets involved and makes the matters even worse. They complicate things unnecessarily. In terms of a nikah, is there any recommended amount that a woman should request for her mahar? What is virtuous? My wife says, so cute. It's whatever you want. Here again, the autonomy that Islam has given you for you to choose whatever you want. Whatever you decide. What is virtuous is, I would say, pretty much what is not going to land your future husband in debt. I mean, that probably would be counterproductive to ask him for something that he's going to go in debt giving to you. And both of y'all in debt, right? You ruin his credit, ruin your credit for giving you a dowry. Like, it's just counterproductive to me. So I would say, being reasonable. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a particular dollar amount. It could be Hajj. It could be, whatever you decide. As a woman who goes to school, etc., how can I stay on my deen? How can I remain consistent in things like salah? Let's just stop there. How can you remain consistent in something like salah? You have to look at the salah as your salvation. That you cannot survive this without prayer. Allah tells us, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek help in prayer. That is your salvation. I mean, you have people, for crying out loud, non-Muslims who meditate. You have 5 prayers a day. Like, why can't you figure that out? People who go put, music on and they zone out because they need to detach. So we have salat. That is the greatest way to detach yourself from the world. The moment you say Allahu Akbar, right? Allah is the greatest, right? You zone out. Now, provided some of us pray and we go through the mechanics of the prayer, and that's just due to spiritual immaturity that we have because we don't really understand how powerful salat really is. I mean, like, miracles happen when you put your forehead on the floor. Many of us are, examples of how those miracles can happen. Some of your parents prayed for you, and here you are. May not be the best of Muslim, but none of us are. But at the same token, here you are. So, I mean, there's it's just as you get older with your experiences in life, you take your religion along with you. And as you mature in life, so should your practice of your religion mature. Salat to me now, I took my shahada when I was 20. Prayer to me now, at 41, is not what prayer was to me at 20. You understand? Completely different. As my life experiences and my journey along life my journey along in life, I took all of those experiences with me when I go into prayer. All of that is connected. All of it. Prayer at 20 is not like prayer at 40. You guys following me? So as you mature with your life, so shall you mature with your religion, provided you take it along with you. I mean, there are verses in the Qur'an that I read now that I have a whole different understanding and relationship with, different from when I learned them years ago. Right? Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, Abu Bakr, trying to get everybody in order, he quoted a verse. He said, whoever used to worship Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. And whoever used to worship Allah, Allah is ever living and he never dies. And he quoted an ayah from the Qur'an where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that Muhammad is nothing more than a messenger. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم عَلَىٰ أَعْقَابِكُمْ وَمَن يَنقَلِبْ عَلَىٰ عَقِبَيْهِ فَلَن يَضُرَّ اللَّهَ شَيْئًا. That Muhammad is nothing more than a messenger. Many messengers have come before him. If he dies or is killed, are you going to turn back on your heels? Whoever turns back on his heels, he will not harm Allah in the least. When Abu Bakr quoted that ayah, Umar said, كَأَنَّهُ أَوَّلُ مَرَّةٍ سَمِعْتُ هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ. He said it was as if that was the first time I had ever heard that verse. What did he mean by that? It wasn't the first time he heard the ayah. He heard the ayah before, but now because of this experience, it had a different level of relevance in his life. You understand? This shows you that your life experiences and your experiences with the religion are all connected. Don't separate the two. Don't separate the two. You get into an argument with someone on the subway, you get into a fight with someone in the hallway or whatever, you get a bad grade at school, and then you go and you pray. Your prayer has a different meaning for you than when everything is, good in your life. You guys following me? So that is one of the ways that you stay connected, is that not to separate or disconnect your experience, your religious experiences from your worldly experiences. It's all connected. Is a woman's voice ha'awrah? No. What is the evidence? That we just mentioned the evidence. The Prophet ﷺ, he told the woman, he said that the virgin is, you should not marry her except with her permission. They said, what is her permission? Her silence. Her silence is powerful. Her silence is saying something. And this whole idea that the woman's voice is ha'awrah basically is another method of keeping the woman silent. Stealing her voice from her. If fear Allah, sister, your voice is ha'awrah. But meanwhile, you as a man can go talk to any woman you want to. But the Muslim woman has to just shut up, sit in the corner somewhere and be quiet. No, that narrative is no longer functional. That narrative has not worked and it's not working. Not to mention, I don't know an authentic hadith that says that the woman's voice is ha'awrah. Huh? It probably comes from some narration or some, idea that, is passed down generation after generation. But the fact of the matter is that the only thing that the Qur'an mentions is about the woman seductively speaking to someone. And obviously, that is something that is haram. If a woman is married or not married, she should not be speaking seductively, so that, as Allah says, that you begin to move the person in whose heart there's a disease. That is for her own protection. But as far as a woman speaking, what is the implication? What are we actually saying when we say that the woman's voice is ha'awrah? What are we saying? What are we not saying? Excuse me. We know what we're saying. What are we not saying? That the woman should just shut up. Not say anything. And we live in an environment where many women are single, where many women are single mothers, and the only thing they have is their voice. To take that away from them would be to disarm them for everything that they need to, make the world around them revolve. Make the world around them move. That's the only thing that she does have is her voice. And we're going to take that away from her? Come on. We have to put everything in perspective. That wasn't the situation of the Sahabiyah. Aisha was a scholar, was an alima. There was a curtain between her and the people but she had students of knowledge that, graduated, students of knowledge who came underneath her tutelage. And her voice was not an awrah. She was a scholar amongst many of the other Sahabiyat. You mentioned the rights of a man over a woman. What would be a woman's right over her husband? Any short hadith? The hadith that I mentioned, what is the rights of the wife over her husband? And the Prophet ﷺ said that you feed her from where you feed yourself, you clothe her from where you clothe herself, that you don't strike her in the face, that you do not insult her verbally, you don't verbally abuse her, physically abuse. If we had to just break that down into concepts, right? We don't verbally abuse her, don't physically abuse her, or psychologically abuse her. To starve a woman from food, drink, and clothing, that's psychological abuse. Don't verbally abuse her, like do not insult her. Right? Don't strike her in the face. Right? All of this, we had to categorize this into concepts. It would be no physical abuse, no verbal abuse, and no psychological abuse. If we had to break that down into categories. That's essentially what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. Right? Don't remove the woman from her home. Don't put her out of her home. Right? All of the rights of the woman are too many to mention in just a short sitting.
Imam Muhammad, what are like some of the core subjects people should discuss before getting married, so that like later on, like 2-3 years down the line when they get married, it's not an issue. Like you said, if someone wants to move to a different state, they should mention that in the beginning. So what are other
he's asking what are some of the things that couples should discuss before actually going into marriage, so that they don't end up in this conundrum, they don't end up in this, bumping heads in terms of her wanting to go in one direction, him wanting to go into another direction. Transparency builds trust. Just being transparent about the person, about what you expect and what you would like to do. One of the things that I think a lot of times young couples do is to dismiss or erase their own identity within their marriage, and you begin to live in the shadow of your spouse. More so women living in the shadow of their husband. He gets a job offer here, so she has to kind of follow along. He has to go here, she has to kind of follow along. And then year after year after year go by, all of the things that she wanted to accomplish and do for herself, she has to have put on pause to accommodate her husband. And I just think that at the end of the day, this leaves women feeling bitter. This leaves women feeling, unfulfilled. This leaves women, with so many, challenges in her life, in her heart, and, and feelings of insecurity, feelings of, being worthless and not mattering, So it's important for, people to, for men especially, because that's the norm in Islamic marriages, is that, the woman is just pretty much there to accommodate you as the husband in whatever direction you choose to go in life. And I think that men from the very beginning giving the woman, hey, what would you like to do? Even if you don't know what you want to do right now at this moment, that door is always open for us to have that discussion, and always leaving that door open and letting her feel that she has that autonomy. Opposed to allowing someone from the outside to come out and say, well, why are you following around this man? You don't have to do that, and put that bug in her ear. And then once that happens, as I said before, it has a ripple effect. If you give something freely, it's done in a healthy way and you can manage it. But once you don't give something when it's due, in its due time, and the person has to take it from you, it's taken with, aggression. And there's a ripple effect that is connected to that. That sometimes that is beyond your control. So I think that, couples before getting married have to discuss their ambitions, their goals in life, and find a middle course where those things can be met. And it's not that difficult, honestly. Because when you're younger, you tend to think you have all of these goals. As you get older, you start to realize that, those are all pipe dreams, Yes.
I want to ask about the hadith you shared. Because I've heard the hadith before, but most people who mention it in a sense of the Muslim Ummah would be so powerful, it would be in such a secure position that a woman can go and travel all the way to Mecca and make tawaf and then come back, meaning the Muslim Ummah is so secure that she could do that. But I've never heard the opposite viewpoint of it being she will have her own autonomy to just go ahead and do it on her own anyway.
No, the hadith doesn't mean, it means exactly what you said, that there will be aman, there will be safety and security enough for a woman to go do that. But in addition to that, when you look at that hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said to the man, if you live long enough, you will see women doing things that women were not allowed to do before, because there wasn't the safety and security there. So when it's there, you will see women doing things that they weren't doing before. And There are other narrations that mention that the majority of the followers of the Dajjal will be women, to a point where a man would go home and tie his woman up in the home out of fear that she would go out and follow the Dajjal. There are other narrations that mention that for every one man, there would be 50 women that he would be responsible for or have to take care of. So when you can combine all of those hadith are painting to you an image that times will change to a point where women will have some level of authority in society. So when I mention that hadith, although that is the interpretation of the hadith, I'm looking at all of the hadith that mention women in that particular time. And what the Prophet is doing is painting us a picture that things will be different during that time. When he mentioned that there will come a time where women will find companionship in other women and men will find companionship in other men, right? When a woman decides to find companionship in another woman, there are a number of things that happen as a result of that. That is the result of another action. That is a reaction to something else. That's not just, okay, we landed in a time where women now start finding companionship with other women. No, there are events that lead up to that. There are events that lead up to women following the Dajjal. And these are the blanks that we have to fill in with the other narrations. So while we just look at one isolated hadith, I'm looking at all of them that point to that fact. Walaikum salam.
So how do we deal with modernism that's seeping into Umayyad law, especially in like places like campuses and and connecting to even what you just said?
You kind of came at the end. We dealt with that.
Oh, you dealt with it.
We did the whole modernism, and the thing is that that's happening. Like we can't change that. We're not going to stop that. Once movements gain momentum, it's very hard to stop that, right? Even the Prophet ﷺ said with the Khawarij that they will emerge from this guy, Dhu Khuwaisira, they will emerge from him a group of people who you would look at your prayer in disdain in comparison to their prayer, and your fasting compared to their fasting. They will leave out of Islam and not return like an arrow goes to its target without coming back. And he's talking about the momentum that movement is going to gain, and it's going to take them all the way out of the fold of Islam. And so what I'm saying with the sisters, with this whole movement of removing the hijab and the fashion shows and the makeup and all of the Instagram pages and all of this stuff, that stuff is gaining momentum, but the momentum takes you out of the fold of Islam. What the Prophet was explaining to us about the Khawarij was basically what happens with every movement. Think about, I hate to say it, think about the Salafi movement. Let's go there. And how it gained momentum to a point where it took many people outside of the fold of Islam. Because there was an extremism. I'm not saying that the concept of Salafism is wrong. That's what we should all adopt in terms of our belief in Islam and our approach to Islam, the Qur'an and the Sunnah, and the three, virtuous generations that came after. That's what I believe we should all ascribe to. Nonetheless, when you attach an extreme element to that, it gains momentum to the point where it will exit the person out of the fold of Islam, because there are no parameters on it. There's an extreme element attached to it. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ was referring to with the Khuwaisira, with the Khawarij, and any other group that he prophesied, that they were going to exit Islam. And that's where that momentum takes you. So when we're looking at women now, on the cover of fashion magazines, and it looks like, Muslim women are being empowered now and they're getting the recognition, but there's an end goal to that. And the end goal is not just, hey, Muslim women are getting respect now and Muslim women are acknowledged now. The end goal for that, as it always is with shaitan, is to remove you from the fold of Islam altogether. If there are no boundaries. And what we're seeing are Muslim women who are allowing this movement to pull them further and further away from Islam. Not just pull them further and further away from Islam, but they now begin to look at Muslim men as, you're not necessarily an option for me anymore. You have Muslim women who now, would prefer a non-Muslim man. And many have, and many are. Because of this. And, as that movement continues, it continues to have a ripple effect on our ummah. So it's important. I think it's important that Muslim women do have that acknowledged. You have Nike making hijabs. You have, different companies that are now catering to Muslim women. And although it's capitalism at the root of it, to get the Muslim, tap into that Muslim, what is the word I'm looking for? The market. Muslim, that demographic. The Muslims now, companies now realize that there's money in that market there. So you have Tom Ford making oud, you have Nike making hijabs, you have people are tapping into the market right now, right? But we have to make sure that as consumers, we don't get consumed. We don't get consumed by the consumerism, and it pulls us and detaches us from our religion, man. Very dangerous, man. There's an end goal. Shaitan's goal is always, he doesn't care if you go to the right or the left, just as long as you don't hit your target. You understand? Shaitan does not care whether you go to the right or you go to the left, as long as you don't hit your target. It said, if there comes a pious man, but a sister prefers marrying a practicing brother of her own race, is that a problem? Is she sinful for turning it down because she feels she won't connect? No, there's nothing wrong with that. Here again, your autonomy to choose what you believe is going to make you happy. However, in choosing a man from your own culture, you have to, you have to ask yourself: are you playing it safe by choosing what you are, choosing a man from your own culture because it's safe, or are you choosing a man because you believe that this person is going to help you become a better Muslim? By you, aligning your life with his life that is going to, bring you closer to Allah. We have to come out of our comfort zones. This whole idea of marrying somebody from my culture is, I personally think with a lot of people, it's not necessarily I feel like I can connect with somebody from my culture better. I just think that it's a comfort zone for us. It's comfort. It's safe. I know what I'm going to get with this person, right? But you have to also understand that along with the good of being the safety of it is also the negative, the cultural, behaviors and traditions that come along with that. And here again, we fall right into that stigma we fall right in line with the, giving precedence to the cultural traditions over what our religion dictates. He had his hand up first.
What advice would you give on a cross-cultural marriage?
What
advice would you give
to
a cross-cultural marriage?
A cross-cultural marriage? I don't know. When it happens, come see me. When you marry somebody outside your culture, with these, come see me. I don't know. I haven't dealt with that much. In the African-American community, we pretty much, just being honest with you, just real talk. As African-Americans, we don't really have too many options outside of the African-American community. We don't. Even if we find a woman that is of a different ethnicity and she's feeling me, I'm feeling her, her parents are never going to accept it. So it's not going to go but so far anyway, right? So we are one of those cultures, unfortunately, where there are not a lot of options. So in my community, I don't really deal with a lot of cross-cultural marriages. I don't. Well, she didn't say that the person from her culture wasn't pious, so I'm just automatically assuming that he is, right? If the person from her culture is not righteous and she's marrying him simply because she feels like she will connect with him more, and she denies the person that is righteous, the Prophet ﷺ said that if you do that, then you should expect much fitna. Right? إذا جاءكم من ترضون دينه وخلقه فزوجوه وإن لم تفعلوا فتكون فتنة في الأرض وفساد كبير. That, if someone comes to you that is righteous and you are pleased with his character and his practice of the religion, then marry him. And if you don't, then there will be much corruption and there will be much fitna. So if a woman chooses to marry a man from her culture that is not righteous and turn down a man that is righteous but not from her culture, then she can expect nothing but fitna from that. Absolutely. I was just putting the best construction on it and just assuming that she just wanted to marry him for cultural reasons, but he is actually righteous. Speaking of women and perhaps traveling, can you go over whether women are allowed to study abroad, which is usually with safe company? Allahu a'lam. I don't There is a debate on whether a Muslim man can marry a non-Muslim person, Christian or Jewish. Muslim men are allowed. There is an allowance, a rukhsah, where that Muslim man is allowed to marry a woman from Ahlul Kitab. He's not allowed to marry any non-Muslim woman, right? That Allah says that permissible for you is the food from the people of the book and the women of the people, and to marry their women from the people of the book, Ahlul Kitab. We're talking about Jewish and Christian people of the book. All right, not just any random non-Muslim woman, whether she's agnostic, atheist, or no, but people of the book. And of course, that's an allowance, meaning that's not the preferred option for the Muslim man. It's not the preferred option, but it is allowed due to whatever preferences or circumstances that the man has. But a Muslim woman is not allowed to marry any but a Muslim man. A Muslim woman is not allowed to marry any but a Muslim man. If she marries someone who is not a Muslim, then the marriage is null and void. It's not even considered a marriage Islamically. Can you please continue to define the true aspects of patriarchy in Islam, because the opposite, as we all know, is more prevalent? Why have many men failed in applying the true station of patriarchy and manhood before the women in Islam? Good question. I'm going to ask the men to answer that. She said, why is it that true patriarchy, which is the men being responsible for the women, not necessarily dominating over them or being more superior than them, but actually leveling them up and protecting them and maintaining them the way that true patriarchy is defined in Islam, why have the Muslim men failed the Muslim woman in that regard? Why do you think? He said is due to ignorance of men, being ignorant of the status, the true status of women in Islam, and sort of maybe arrogance of him only being concerned about his rights and, her catering to him. Good point. Let's keep it going. I want to see where we go with this. Yasser. Okay. He said there's, as pretty much the culture, the cultural norms and the cultural bars that have been set for us, and we just kind of follow along that line without actually going deeper into the true status that Islam has given women. Yes?
I didn't hear the full question. It's about patriarchy and why Muslims adhere to it, right?
Why Muslim men are not adhering to the definition of patriarchy as given to us by the Qur'an, of men leveling women up and giving them the autonomy while still protecting and maintaining them.
I would say not only is it cultural, like the culture of whatever countries that we're coming from. Like, for example, Islam obviously is spread from Saudi and it went to other countries. Those countries have their own cultures, and those cultures obviously affected how Islam was practiced. And as the years went by, obviously Western world was growing. Western laws and Western customs were going into those countries. And the more we adhered not only to our own cultures, but to Western culture, the men started getting higher and higher and higher. Western culture is very patriarchal. So Muslim men took that as an advantage. Well, Muslim men who didn't have the right understanding of Islam and women in Islam control their household to have the authority to make decisions and the authority to to even impact Islam and how women even learn about Islam. Like, there are a lot of countries where women aren't allowed to go to the mosque. It's only a place for men.
There are many masjids right here in America
Yeah.
where there's no section for the women at all, period.
And that's because of cultural patriarchy from the cultures that we're coming from and Western patriarchy combined create a world where women are like rock bottom. They're not. It's very hard to break down all those levels of patriarchy.
Absolutely. Very, very, very well stated. She broke it down going back to colonialism and how many Muslim countries were colonized. And on top of Islam spreading into different countries and being co-opted by the cultures of those countries, being colonized by Western, Western superpowers, and then infusing within those cultures Western culture on top of all of that. So now you not only... So Islam is literally buried underneath levels of, colonization, cultural traditions, and all of these other things. And underneath all of that lies, Islam, which we, kind of just peeling back the layers right now, trying to get to the bottom of it. And here we are today. This is what we're doing. We're peeling back all of the cultural traditions, the colonization that has, infringed on our ability to really see Islam for what it is through our culture, just peeling back all of these layers, and at the bottom of it all is, the autonomy, the respect, the empowerment, all of these things that Islam has given to women, which we haven't even scratched the surface. We haven't even scratched the surface, man. He said, in short, that if a man does not love Allah and respect Allah enough to give him his rights, then how could you expect that this same man would give a woman her rights? And you're absolutely right. But then the problem is that we have so many men like this running around in our communities and are marrying our women that we can't really sift through them all. And then if we do, then there's still really not really many men left to marry our women. It's not. So the thing is that it's systematic. Like when we talk about racism, we're not talking about this man who sees you as an Arab and says you're a terrorist. No, we're talking about the system that has empowered him to look at you and say you're an Arab, you're a terrorist, or you're black and I don't like you, right? We're talking about a system that backs that mentality. So when we're talking about men who don't fear Allah, don't respect women, we're talking about a system that has empowered him to think like that and to act like that. And here we are today where a Muslim man can beat his wife in the home, come to the masjid, and all the imam can offer is be patient. He's been empowered by default of our cowardice. Absolutely. Yes.
This system is still in place, even with the whole, nowadays, with the whole feminism and all that. It hasn't really reached to the Muslim world, mainly because not only are, Muslim countries are led by majority Muslim men. Muslim men are so, abhorrent to the woman talking against that occupational system that they will, kill down all those conversations. They won't even let them happen. For example, if a sister has a question for an imam, he won't even know the answer to a simple question about Muslim women in Islam. And on top of that, the masjids, they don't teach Muslim women's rights to the boys who go to their masjid classes. It's you learn Qur'an, you learn about the prophets, you learn about the Sahaba, you learn about Sharia, but you don't learn the roles that Aisha played in the Sunnah. You don't learn about the roles as a woman who fought for Islam. You don't learn about that. Why? Okay, women will learn about that. The sisters who are leaving the sisters' side, they'll teach them sisters is this, this is why you should wear hijab. But they don't.
No, I overstand your point. And she's saying that, they're in the Islamic education, in the Islamic schools, as well as in the masajid, a lot of times young boys, and you guys can attest to this, how many Muslim women were you actually taught about Like, how many Muslim women from the early generation of Islam were you actually taught about in Islamic school or in, your local masjid or whatever the case may be? Were there halaqas? None. And that's part of the problem. Because when you go into the Islamic school, 95% of the teachers are women. You're surrounded by women 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but yet you know absolutely nothing about women in Islam. That's a problem. And at the head of it all is a man. He's the principal of the school, the mudir, right? All of the teachers, the subordinates, right? All of the teachers are women. And at the head of it all is a man walking around the school, telling everybody what to do, telling the teachers, sometimes correcting the teachers in front of the students, right? And that only reinforces in our minds as young boys that these women are just here for our convenience. We are reinforcing these mentalities. We are reinforcing these things. So I think that you brought up a great point. And I think that part of what can help change that is to incorporate, and I begin doing this with my students. This year, which was the first year I did this, with my 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, I made each one of them choose a sahabi or sahabiyat. I gave them a list of companions outside of the 10 that everybody knows about, the 10 that was promised Jannah. No, we're not doing that. We're going to go deeper and learn about some of the sahaba, sahabiyat, and what they did was they had to go back and they had to write and they had to type up an essay about that particular companion in their own words. Go back, read the story, read the biography of that person, write a no less than 2-page essay about what you learned and what you benefited from that person. And then they had to stand in front of the school. Each day, a different student had to stand in front of the school and present what they learned about that person. And believe it or not, what happened was all of the boys chose men and all of the girls chose women. Without me even saying anything. And that's the problem. That is the problem. I've never heard a woman, somebody said this, that I never heard a woman say that having a son taught me how to respect men. But you always hear men say, having a daughter taught me how to respect women. So I think that we need to reverse this process of men learning about men and women learning about women, and women learning about some of the men, Sahaba, and boys learning more about the women of the Sahaba. Amara, who was on the battlefield fighting with the Prophet ﷺ, holding her jilbab with one hand, fighting with her sword, defending the Prophet ﷺ with the other hand. Her son was martyred on the battlefield. She ran on the battlefield when she heard the Prophet had been hit. And she said, what happened to the Messenger of Allah? They said, but your son was killed. She said, I'm not worried about my son. I prepared him for death from the moment he was born. I'm worried about the Messenger of Allah. What happened to him? Is he okay? You understand? As a boy, reading that, it does something to you. But here we are, the boys learning about the men and the men learning about the women. Similar to what we mentioned in the hadith, that the men from the Sahaba, when they came and they asked the Prophet about the rights of marriage, they weren't asking about their rights, they were asking about the rights of the woman. So maybe we need to reverse this idea of men learning about men things and women learning about women things instead of, and reverse that. And men need to learn about issues that affect women, because you are ultimately going to marry a woman. You're going to marry a woman. You need to know when she can pray, when she can't pray. You need to know how to help her navigate through, right? The Prophet ﷺ was performing Hajj, and he noticed Aisha crying on Hajj. Why would a woman be crying on Hajj? He already knew. He didn't have to say anything. He saw his woman crying while they were performing Hajj. He knew that her menses was there. And he said, do everything that the Haji does when he performs, with the exception of tawaf around the Kaaba. You understand? Like, he catered because he understood. For many of us as men, we're so oblivious, the woman gotta like spell it out for us. It's like, duh, right? Right? I remember one time it caught me off guard, like the female students in the school. I was coming from the wudu area and they were sitting in the back of the musalla. I'm like, why are you guys sitting here? And I'm like, I just kept walking. I said, don't worry about it. I just kept walking to join the rank. I felt so embarrassed because I should have known better. But can you imagine how embarrassing that is? That your teacher comes out, you're sitting in the back of the musalla in the corner by yourself. There's already a level of embarrassment there because everyone else is in the masjid praying, right? While they're sitting, 4 or 5 of them sitting in the back of the masjid not praying. And the teacher walks out, why are you guys sitting here? Why are you not in the rank praying? And it's like, never mind. I'm sorry. Right? We need to be aware of stuff like that as men, right? It's important. Like I'm saying. Okay. He said that are you asking like how do you know if you have married a righteous person?
No, I'm asking about, so let's say I have
a specific goal that you have set for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you know that marrying this person?
Level of practicing, whether it's just my law and should I be focused on getting a spouse that is a bit more righteous than me right now, that I can look up to reach her level, or find someone at my level of spirituality, or find someone that I can pull down from that level of spirituality to my level.
Got you. He said that when looking for a spouse, you have a goal set for yourself in terms of where you would like to be spiritually or in your practice of Islam. Should you marry someone based upon where you are currently or someone that is a little bit above you and perhaps, they can come down to your level and help you elevate? Or, should you marry, how do you determine who you should marry when you have in your mind where you would like to be religiously or spiritually? People change. What you might have thought was going to be your end goal, that may change next year, 2 years from now. I mean, generally you want to marry someone who does pray. That has the basis of Islam. They do pray. If your preference that she wears hijab, that she does wear hijab. And she has the basics of Islam. She comes from a Muslim family, good practicing, active in the community, Muslim family. All right? You go for the basics because what you might perceive yourself to be, in a few years, you might not reach that. Things happen in our lives and, we get deterred by a lot of things. So where you might be on this trajectory, I want to be Hafiz Qur'an in 5 years. I want to be able to make Hajj. I want to be able to do this, do this, do this, do this. After you get married, things change. You might want to go in a different direction. Not in terms of your spirituality, not that you're going to leave Islam, right? The scholars, they have a saying, ذَبَحَ طَلَبِ الْعِلْمِ مَا بَيْنَ فَخِذَيْ الْمَرْأَةِ. If you know Arabic, then you know what I just said. All right? So you have many students of knowledge who are ambitious about being students of knowledge and they want to go. And then as soon as they get married, all that's gone out the window. Right? So the point that I'm making is that I think that anyone going after a spouse should at least get the bare minimum. You have someone who prays. You have someone who observes the hijab. You have someone who reads Qur'an. Maybe, not as often as you would like, but they do have a foundation that you can build on, right? That you can build on. As far as choosing someone who is, more of a religious person, religious people come with a certain level of responsibility. And if you're not on that level, right, we're always looking for Muhammad, but you're not Khadija, or vice versa. You're looking for, Khadija, but you're not Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And people who are religious, people who get up for Fajr every morning, people who read Qur'an on a regular basis, those type of people come with a different mentality, a whole different dynamic. And if you are not really ready to make those sacrifices, what you end up doing is pulling that person from where they are to where you are. And then that person looks back and say, you know what? Like, since I married you, I don't even read Qur'an as often as I used to. I'm even slacking on my Sunnah prayers. You've now brought them down. And you should meet somebody where you are so that you guys can build each other up together, inshallah. Last one.
My question is within the Muslim community, there's still certain types of racism within Muslims themselves. Sometimes when a couple get married, sometimes the family might say you can't marry that person from that community because they're from this community. And because I don't like that community, I feel a superiority complex over that community. What would you say to those parents?
Whew. You want to end this on a good note? Khitamuhu misk. Let's end it on a good note. He said, what would I say to parents who refuse to marry their children to other people from other communities because they feel they're more superior than them, or they feel that people from this particular community or this particular ethnicity is not good enough to marry my child, and they have this mentality. And you have Muslim parents who think like this, that you're not going to marry anyone outside of your culture, anyone outside of your race. What would you say to a parent like this? The Prophet ﷺ has some very choice words to people who brag about where they come from and consider themselves to be superior. He said that if you see someone bragging about where they come from, then tell them to, I can't even repeat what he said because it might not be the appropriate place, but basically that you bragging about where you're coming from, you actually come from a sperm cell, which is one of the nastiest fluids known to man. And so if you're going to brag about where you come from, then brag about that, basically. And he said, don't sugarcoat it, right? Say it exactly like that. And I mean, some of our parents, unfortunately, they just need to be educated. And as their children, we cannot allow our parents to use the N-word, refer to black people as niggers, right? Which some parents do. And we don't say anything to them. We have to stand in our own discomfort and say, you know what, that's inappropriate. You've adopted this American mentality where you think that you can just come here from wherever country you come from and just fall in line with the elite of this society. That's not our religion. The Prophet championed the cause of the underdog. He wasn't going after the elite. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admonished him about that. Abasa wa tawalla. Right? That whole surah was dedicated to the Prophet ﷺ turning his attention towards the elite and leaving alone those who were weak, oppressed, marginalized. His goal was to champion the cause of the voiceless and not to placate the feelings of the elite. And so by coming here and referring to African Americans as niggers, referring to this group of people as being poor, this group of people as being here for all of these years and they still haven't got their stuff together, they're just feeding into that narrative. And you, being cultured in this environment, have to be able to correct them and educate them. No, you have to understand that there's a long history here. You don't open a book that has 300 pages and start at 200 and think that you understand the gist of the book. You don't. You got to go back to the introduction, the prelude. You got to work your way up to understand, right, the full context of the book. And many of our parents, unfortunately, this is what they've done. They feed into this narrative. And it's you guys, you second, third generation Muslims, it's your responsibility to educate your parents. And hopefully with you, that will change. That mentality will change. But, as it stands, this is where we are, man. This is where we are as a ummah. And I think that the fact that we're even having this conversation is a sign that there's some progression here. There is some progression. I know a lot of you guys are tired of this stuff. You want to be able to marry who you want to marry. And if it was in my hands, I would, make that happen for you. But unfortunately, we have some obstacles that we need to overcome. And in due time, inshallah. Allahu ghalibun ala amri. Allah is in control of this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And when we leave everything in his hands, in due time, what needs to take place here will take place bi'idhnillah. I believe that. Wallahu a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. Wa subhanaka rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair. You guys have been good, man. You stayed for the whole thing. Usually people get up and leave. They're tired. They got some other things to do. You guys stayed. Alhamdulillah. Wa iyyakum.
Jazakallah khair.